By the time Bumpy Johnson went to prison in 1952, he trusted one man more than anyone else in Harlem, his driver, a kid from North Carolina who had been in New York less than 6 years. And that trust would create a $100 million empire and destroy it completely. But it didn't start with power. It started with hunger. Frank Lucas stepped off the Greyhound bus in January 1946 with $47 in his pocket and no plan beyond survival. 15 years old, running from North Carolina, where his cousin had been killed by the Klan. Harlem was supposed to be different, safer, better. It wasn't. Frank found a mattress on a floor in a boarding house, $3 a week, shared bathroom, 2 other guys from the South sleeping in the same room. He needed work. Nobody would hire him. Too young, no references, no papers. So Frank took whatever came, loading trucks, delivering packages, shining shoes. Some weeks he ate, some weeks he didn't. 2 years like that, surviving, but not living. Watching how Harlem actually worked beneath the surface. Watching men in expensive suits who commanded respect without raising their voices. Watching money change hands in ways that didn't match what was being sold. And hearing one name more than any other, Bumpy Johnson. December 14th, 1948. Frank was 17, delivering prescriptions for a pharmacy on Lenox Avenue. He saw it happen on 135th Street. 3 young guys confronting an older man outside a social club. The older man wore an expensive suit, stood calm, didn't look worried. "You're in our territory, old man. You want to walk these streets? You pay." The older man's response was quiet. "I don't pay anyone, and you should walk away before this becomes a problem." One of them pulled a knife. "We're not asking. We're taking 10 seconds. Frank recognized something in the older man's posture, something in how other people on the street were carefully not watching. This was Bumpy Johnson, and these 3 kids were about to die. Frank ran across the street, put himself between them. "You need to leave, now, before you do something you can't take back." They looked at Frank like he was insane. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone trying to save your lives. Walk away." One moved toward Frank with the knife. Bumpy moved faster, grabbed the wrist, twisted. The knife hit the pavement. One punch, the guy went down, the other 2 ran. Bumpy looked at Frank. "That was either very brave or very stupid." "Probably both," Frank admitted. "You know who I am?" "Bumpy Johnson. If I'm wrong, this is embarrassing." Bumpy smiled slightly. "You're not wrong. What's your name?" "Frank Lucas." "Come see me tomorrow at Small's Paradise. I might have work for you." Then Bumpy walked away. Frank stood there understanding his life had just changed completely. Frank showed up at Small's Paradise the next day, wearing his best clothes. Bumpy was waiting. "Tell me about yourself." Frank told him. North Carolina, the Klan, coming north with nothing, 2 years of survival work, wanting something more than just not starving. "Why did you help me yesterday?" Bumpy asked. Frank thought about it. "Because 3-on-1 isn't fair, and because I've been watching how Harlem works. You represent something important here. Letting those kids hurt you would have been wrong." Bumpy nodded slowly. "You're observant. That's rare. Most people see surface things. You see systems. That's valuable." "I can offer you a job. Runner for my numbers operation. $25 weekly. But it requires absolute reliability, absolute discretion, absolute honesty about money you handle. If you steal, if you talk, if you're unreliable, there are severe consequences. You understand?" "Yes, sir. I won't let you down." "Good. You start Monday." Frank started to leave. Bumpy stopped him. "One more thing. You have potential beyond being a runner. I saw that yesterday. So I'm going to teach you this business. Not just how to collect money, how to think, how to build organizations, how to succeed in a world that doesn't want black men to succeed. If you're willing to learn, I'm willing to teach. But once you learn from me, you represent me. Your successes reflect on me. Your failures reflect on me. Can you handle that responsibility? Frank met his eyes. I can. They shook hands. That handshake changed everything. Frank's first real test came 3 weeks after starting as a runner, March 1949. Frank was collecting from a barbershop on 145th Street. The controller there, a man named Raymond, handed Frank an envelope with the day's receipts. Frank counted it. Came up $200 short. "This doesn't match your sheet," Frank said. Raymond's face went hard. "You calling me a thief?" "I'm saying the numbers don't match. Either there's a mistake or someone's taking money they shouldn't take. You're new, kid. You don't know how things work yet. Sometimes the count is off. That's normal. Take what I gave you and move on." Frank had a choice. Take the money, report the discrepancy to Bumpy, let Bumpy handle it, or handle it himself. He chose wrong, or right, depending on perspective. "I'm not moving on," Frank said. "Either you give me the full amount, or I'm waiting here until you do." Raymond stood up. He was bigger than Frank, older, more experienced. "You threatening me?" "I'm doing my job. You're short $200. I need that money." Raymond reached under the counter. His hand came back with a revolver. "Leave, now, before this becomes a problem." Frank didn't move, didn't reach for a weapon, didn't back down, just stood there. "If you shoot me, Mr. Johnson will know why, and you'll have to explain where that $200 went. Your choice." They stared at each other for maybe 10 seconds. Raymond put the gun down, reached into his pocket, pulled out $200. "You got problems, kid. You're going to end up dead before you're 20. "Maybe, but not today." Frank took the money, completed his route, returned to Bumpy's office. He reported the incident exactly as it happened. Didn't embellish, didn't make himself sound braver than he'd been. Bumpy listened without interrupting. When Frank finished, Bumpy said, "Raymond pulled a gun on you and you didn't back down?" "No, sir." "Why not?" "Because backing down meant letting him steal, and letting him steal meant I wasn't doing my job properly." Bumpy was quiet for a moment. "Raymond's been with my organization for 8 years. Reliable, professional. Never had problems with him before." "I know, sir. I'm not trying to cause trouble, just reporting what happened." "I believe you," Bumpy said, "and you're fired." Frank felt his stomach drop. "Sir?" "You're fired as a runner because you're too valuable to waste on collection routes. Starting tomorrow, you're my driver. You'll take me to meetings. Wait outside. Listen when I want you to listen. Learn the business from the inside. Your pay doubles, $50 weekly. And Frank, what you did today with Raymond, that took courage most men don't have. You proved something I needed to know." Later, Frank learned that Bumpy had investigated Raymond's accounts going back 6 months, found systematic discrepancies totaling nearly $3,000. Raymond was removed from the organization, not killed, just removed. Bumpy didn't believe in unnecessary violence, but the message was clear. Bumpy valued honesty above longevity, and Frank had proven he could be trusted even when being honest was dangerous. Being Bumpy's driver was unlike anything Frank had experienced. He picked Bumpy up every morning at 8, drove him to meetings throughout the city, waited outside while Bumpy conducted business, drove him home at night. But mostly, Frank listened. Bumpy used drive time to teach. "Organization is everything," Bumpy said during one drive. "Most people who try this business think collecting money means running a business. It doesn't. You need systems, people who know their roles, clear reporting lines, backup plans. Organization separates temporary success from lasting success." Another drive. "You think power comes from fear. It doesn't. Fear is fragile. Lasts only as long as people believe you'll hurt them. Better to build loyalty through treatment. Pay well, protect people, show respect. That creates loyalty that lasts. Another, violence always creates more problems than it solves. Someone you hurt might fight back, might have friends who retaliate, might involve police. Smart people minimize violence because violence is expensive and unpredictable. Frank absorbed everything, watched how Bumpy handled conflicts, how he negotiated with competitors, how he maintained relationships with Italian families, how he resolved internal disputes without creating permanent enemies. And Frank began to understand that Bumpy's success wasn't about being the toughest or the most ruthless. It was about being the smartest and most strategic. April 1950. Frank was driving Bumpy back from a meeting in the Bronx. Late night, dark streets. They were on the Harlem River Drive when Frank noticed headlights behind them, following too close. Not normal traffic patterns. "Mr. Johnson, I think we have a problem." Bumpy looked back. "How long have they been following?" "Since we left the Bronx." "Can you lose them?" Frank checked the mirrors. 2 cars now, boxing them in. Not without a chase, and this car's not built for that. The cars moved closer. Frank saw gun barrels extending from windows. "Get down!" Bumpy dropped to the floor. Frank accelerated hard. The first shot shattered the rear window. Frank didn't panic, kept the car steady, took the next exit fast. The following cars tried to follow, but Frank knew these streets better. Turned down an alley, cut the lights, waited. The 2 cars passed, searching, didn't see them. Frank waited 3 minutes, then drove back roads to Bumpy's building, parked in an underground garage, made sure nobody had followed. Only then did Bumpy get up. "You stayed calm," Bumpy observed. "Most people would have panicked, crashed, got us both killed." "Panicking doesn't help," Frank said. "Needed to think, get us somewhere safe." Bumpy studied Frank. "Someone just tried to kill me. You could have run, left me in that car, saved yourself. Why didn't you?" "Because you trusted me to protect you. That's my job." "It's more than a job. You put your life at risk for mine. That's loyalty, real loyalty. That's rare, Frank. Extremely rare. I won't forget it." Bumpy later discovered who'd organized the ambush. A competitor trying to eliminate Bumpy and take his territories. Bumpy resolved the situation without Frank ever learning the details. But something changed after that night. Bumpy trusted Frank with more than just driving. Trusted him with information, with sensitive tasks, with responsibilities that went beyond what employees normally received. Frank had proven he could be trusted when trust mattered most. August 1951. Bumpy called Frank to his office. "I need you to do something. It's dangerous. If you get caught, you'll go to prison for decades. If you get robbed, you'll lose money that took me years to accumulate. If you get killed, well, you'll be dead. You can say no, no judgment. But if you say yes, I need absolute trust that you can handle it." "What is it?" "I need you to drive $10 million from Harlem to Philadelphia. Cash. In a car. By yourself. No security. No backup. Just you." Frank felt his heart rate increase. "Why no security?" "Because security attracts attention. Looks like you're transporting something valuable. One man in a normal car looks like regular traffic. The risk is that you'll be alone if something goes wrong. But the benefit is nobody will know what you're carrying." "Why me?" "Because I trust you more than anyone else. You proved that last April when you could have run and didn't. You proved it every day since by being reliable and discreet. I'm asking you to prove it again by transporting more money than most people see in their lifetimes." Frank thought about it. The danger, the responsibility, the trust Bumpy was demonstrating. "When do I leave?" Tomorrow morning, early. I'll give you the address in Philadelphia. You deliver the money, get a receipt, drive back. Simple. Except for the $10 million in your trunk. That night, Frank barely slept. The next morning, Bumpy walked Frank to the car, an ordinary Chevrolet sedan. Nothing special, nothing that would attract attention. The trunk was loaded with metal cases, locked, heavy. $10 million is in those cases, Bumpy said. The receipt you get in Philadelphia proves delivery. Don't open the cases. Don't stop unless absolutely necessary. Don't speed. Don't attract police attention. Just drive like you're going to visit family. Boring, normal, forgettable. Yes, sir. And Frank, if something goes wrong, if someone tries to rob you, or if police stop you, don't fight. Give up the money. Your life is worth more than $10 million. I can replace money. I can't replace you. Frank nodded. He drove. 3 hours to Philadelphia. Regular speed. Stayed in right lanes. Looked like every other commuter on the road. Delivered the money to an address in South Philadelphia. Italian family territory. Received a signed receipt. Drove back. Nothing went wrong. No police stops. No robberies. No problems. He delivered the receipt to Bumpy that evening. Bumpy examined it. Put it in his safe. Turned to Frank. You just proved I can trust you with anything. Literally anything. Most people would have run with $10 million. Disappeared. Started new lives. You could have been rich, beyond imagining. You didn't. You did exactly what I asked. That's worth more than the $10 million you transported. That's worth everything. From that day forward, Frank wasn't just Bumpy's driver. He was Bumpy's most trusted associate. The person Bumpy relied on for the most sensitive tasks. The person Bumpy knew would never betray him. That trust would last until Bumpy went to prison, and even after, Frank would honor it for a while. June 1952. Frank drove Bumpy to Little Italy for a meeting with the Genovese family. This was sensitive. The Italians controlled most illegal operations in New York. Bumpy maintained careful relationships with them, cooperated when necessary, maintained autonomy when possible. Today's meeting was about expansion. Bumpy wanted to operate in territories the Italians considered theirs, needed permission, or at least agreement that wouldn't lead to conflict. Frank waited in the car outside the restaurant, watched the street, made sure nobody was setting up an ambush like the one the previous year. After 2 hours, Bumpy emerged. In the car, Bumpy explained, they agreed to let me expand into border territories. Cost me 15% of gross revenue from those areas. I'd offered 10%. They wanted 20. We settled at 15. Did you lose that negotiation? Frank asked. No, I got what I wanted. Permission to expand. Continued good relationships. Avoidance of conflict. 15% is cheap for all that. Never be afraid to pay for peace, Frank. Fighting is expensive. Cooperation is usually smarter. Frank learned something crucial that day. Power wasn't just about being strong enough to take what you wanted. Sometimes power meant being smart enough to pay for what you needed and avoid conflicts that would cost more than they gained. He'd later forget this lesson, and that forgetting would cost him dearly. November 1952. Someone close to Bumpy cooperated with federal agents, provided detailed testimony about Bumpy's operations, created evidence that couldn't be defended against. The betrayal came from someone Bumpy had trusted, someone he'd helped, someone who chose freedom over loyalty. Federal agents arrested Bumpy at his home, charged him with multiple violations. The evidence was overwhelming. Frank was at the courthouse when Bumpy was arraigned, watched as bail was set, posted it immediately using money Bumpy had set aside for emergencies. Bumpy was released pending trial, but everyone knew the trial was a formality. The testimony was too detailed, the evidence too comprehensive. Bumpy was going to prison, Before the trial, Bumpy met with his closest associates, made arrangements for operational continuity. Frank, you're going to manage day-to-day operations in Upper Harlem. Report to Teddy Green on finances. But you'll have autonomy on decisions. You've learned well. You saved my life during the ambush. You transported 10 million without stealing a dollar. You've proven loyalty beyond what most people are capable of. I trust you completely. Remember everything I taught you. Don't let my absence make you think you need to prove yourself through aggression. Maintain what exists. Protect people. Make smart decisions. When I get out, we'll build on what you preserved. Frank promised. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury convicted on all major charges. The judge sentenced Bumpy to 15 years in federal prison. Frank visited Bumpy before he was transferred to Alcatraz. I won't let you down, Frank promised. I'll maintain everything. Protect everyone. When you get out, it'll be exactly like you left it. Bumpy looked at Frank with something like sadness. Just remember what I taught you, especially about staying quiet and avoiding attention. The moment you become visible, you become a target. Stay invisible, Frank. That's how you survive. Frank would remember those words, but he wouldn't follow them. For the first few years of Bumpy's imprisonment, Frank kept his promise, managed operations efficiently, maintained relationships with Italian families, protected territories, resolved conflicts without unnecessary violence, sent money to Bumpy's wife, Mayme, every month. He ran the numbers operations exactly how Bumpy would have run them. Conservative, careful, professional. But as years passed and Bumpy's imprisonment stretched toward a decade, Frank began developing ideas beyond just maintaining. Ideas about opportunities Bumpy hadn't pursued, markets that didn't exist when Bumpy built his organization, innovations that could generate revenue beyond anything numbers produced. Frank started noticing patterns. Younger people wanted different things than older generations. Markets were changing. Competition was evolving. The world was different than when Bumpy had gone to prison. And Frank began to think, maybe I can build something bigger than what Bumpy built. Not as replacement, as evolution. June 1958. Frank was walking near his apartment building when he smelled smoke. Looked up, saw flames in a third-floor window, heard screaming, a woman, children. People on the street were watching. Nobody was doing anything, waiting for fire trucks that weren't there yet. Frank ran into the building. Smoke filled the stairwell, heat intense. He covered his face with his jacket, climbed stairs 2 at a time. 3rd floor, found the apartment, door hot to touch. He kicked it open. Inside, a woman with 2 young children, maybe 4 and 6 years old, trapped near the window, flames blocking the door they'd just come through. We're getting out, Frank said. Didn't ask. Told. He grabbed the younger child, told the mother to grab the other one. Follow me, stay low, don't breathe deep. They moved through the smoke. Frank navigated by memory of the building layout, found the stairs, the woman behind him coughing, children crying, down to the 2nd floor. The smoke thinned slightly, down to 1st floor. About to the front door. Fire trucks arrived as they emerged. Paramedics rushed to the woman and children, treated them for smoke inhalation. All survived. Frank tried to leave before anyone asked questions. Didn't want attention, didn't want recognition. But the woman grabbed his arm. You saved us. You saved my babies. Who are you? Just someone who was nearby. What's your name? Frank. Frank Lucas. The woman told the story to everyone. How Frank had run into a burning building when everyone else just watched. How he'd risked his life to save people he didn't know. How he'd refused to take credit or accept thanks. The story spread through Harlem. People knew Frank as Bumpy's associate. Now they knew him as someone brave, someone who'd help people in trouble, someone heroic. Frank didn't want that attention, remembered Bumpy's lesson about staying invisible, but he couldn't avoid it. The story was too good. People wanted to believe someone would run into burning buildings to save children. Frank became more visible, more recognized, more respected. He didn't realize that visibility would later make him a target for law enforcement looking for successful criminals to bring down. March 1963. Bumpy was released after 11 years. He was 58, had health problems, less energy than before prison, but his mind was still sharp, his strategic thinking unchanged. Frank picked him up from the prison, drove him back to Harlem. They didn't talk much during the drive, both processing how much had changed. Back in Harlem, Bumpy resumed control of his organization, but recognized immediately that Frank had grown beyond being just an employee. They met at Small's Paradise. "You did well while I was gone," Bumpy acknowledged. "Maintained everything, kept people protected, sent money to Mayme every month. I'm grateful. But I sense you have bigger ambitions. I see it in how you carry yourself now. You're not the 19-year-old kid who drove me around learning the business. You're 32, experienced, confident. What are you thinking?" Frank was honest. "There are opportunities we're not pursuing. The substance market is growing. Demand is increasing. People want quality. I think I can provide that. Build something more efficient than what currently exists." Bumpy listened. His face showed nothing. "That business is more dangerous than numbers. Law enforcement treats it seriously. Penalties are severe. Violence is worse. You'd be challenging Italian families who control distribution, and you'd be making yourself visible in ways I've always warned against. I understand the risks, but I've learned from you. I know how to build organizations, treat people well, think strategically, and I've proven I can be trusted. $10 million. Remember, I could have run, didn't." Bumpy smiled slightly. "I remember. That's why I'm not going to stop you. You're a grown man. You've earned the right to make your own decisions. But remember everything I taught you, especially about avoiding violence, building relationships, staying quiet, thinking long-term. If you forget those lessons, you'll destroy everything you build." "I won't forget." But he would. Frank's great innovation came from an unexpected source. His cousin Leslie Ike Atkinson was serving in the U.S. military in Vietnam. Ike wrote letters home describing what he saw, including the availability of high-quality product from Southeast Asia. Better than anything in the United States. Cheaper because you bought directly from producers. Frank saw an opportunity nobody else saw. What if you could import that quality using military supply chains? Service members could acquire product in Thailand, pack it in military containers alongside legitimate supplies, ship it using military logistics that received minimal scrutiny. The system would provide multiple advantages: better quality than competitors, lower costs, higher profits, less detections. Risk. Unique market position. Frank contacted Ike, explained the concept. Ike agreed to help. They started small. Test shipments to verify the system worked. It did. By 1968, Frank was importing significant quantities. His operation generated more revenue than Bumpy's numbers racket ever had. Frank was becoming wealthy in ways Bumpy had never achieved. But he was also forgetting lessons Bumpy had taught. Frank applied Bumpy's organizational lessons well, built clear hierarchies, employed family members in management positions, paid people above market rates, created loyalty. But he deviated from other teachings. When competitors emerged, Frank's response was violence, immediate, brutal, not negotiation. When he expanded into territories Italian families controlled, he didn't negotiate properly, didn't pay appropriate percentages, acted independent of structures Bumpy had respected. And Frank became visible, wore expensive fur coats to public events, sat in highly visible seats at sporting events, associated with celebrities like Muhammad Ali, gave interviews discussing his success in barely coded language. Everything Bumpy had warned against. Frank was too successful, too confident, too certain his methods were better than Bumpy's. July 7, 1968. Bumpy collapsed at Wells's restaurant. Heart attack, died before reaching the hospital. 62 years old. Frank attended the funeral, was a pallbearer, carried Bumpy's casket, mourned genuinely. "Mr. Johnson taught me everything that mattered," Frank told someone at the funeral, "how to think strategically, build organizations, treat people well. I owe him everything." But even as Frank said this, his behavior had diverged from Bumpy's teachings. The violence, the visibility, the arrogance, all the things Bumpy had warned against. Frank was building an empire, but he was building it on violations of principles that had made Bumpy successful for decades. Frank's organization generated approximately $1 million per day at peak. Distribution in multiple cities: New York, Philadelphia, Newark, Detroit, Chicago. His personal wealth reached an estimated $52 million. He owned multiple properties, expensive cars, invested in legitimate businesses. He was one of the most successful criminals in America. Attended Ali's fights, was photographed with the champion, associated with celebrities. This was the height of his success, also the beginning of his downfall. Because every lesson Bumpy had taught about staying invisible, Frank violated publicly. December 1972. Frank was walking on Lenox Avenue when he saw two men beating a teenager, kicking him while he was down, robbing him. People on the street watched. Nobody intervened. Frank approached. "That's enough. Leave him alone." The two men turned, recognized Frank, knew his reputation. "This doesn't concern you, Mr. Lucas." "It does now. Leave." One of them pulled a knife. "Or what?" Frank didn't have a weapon, didn't need one. He moved fast, disarmed the first man, hit the second. Both went down. The teenager scrambled up, ran. Frank let the two men leave, didn't pursue, didn't escalate. The incident was witnessed by dozens of people. The story spread. Frank Lucas, powerful criminal, stopping a robbery, protecting a teenager, not caring about the risk. Heroic, but also more visible, more recognizable, more of a target. By 1973, Frank was a priority target. The DEA, NYPD Special Investigations, federal prosecutors, all building cases. The visibility attracted them. The wealth, the public associations, informants provided information, people Frank had employed, people arrested and offered deals. Italian families Frank had alienated, allowed investigations to proceed without interference. January 28, 1975. Coordinated raids across multiple cities, more than 100 officers. Frank was arrested at his home in New Jersey. Helicopters overhead. Media cameras, maximum visibility, evidence was extensive. $4 million in cash, records documenting operations, testimony from associates. Charges carried decades in prison. The trial began early 1976. Prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, documentary records, witness testimony, surveillance, expert analysis. Frank's defense challenged everything, questioned witness credibility, argued Frank was being targeted for his success. The jury didn't care. March 15, 1976, convicted on all major charges. April 6, 1976, sentenced to 70 years in federal prison, effectively life. Frank was 45, had young children, faced dying in prison. Everything he'd built was gone. Facing 70 years, Frank made a choice. He would cooperate with law enforcement, violate the most fundamental rule. The offer, testify, provide information, and his sentence would be dramatically reduced. Frank agreed. Over months, he provided detailed testimony about his operations. Other criminals, corrupt law enforcement officers. His cooperation led to more than 100 additional prosecutions. In exchange, his sentence was reduced to 15 years. Released in 1981 after serving 5 years. Saved from dying in prison, but destroyed his reputation completely. Frank's cooperation saved his freedom, cost everything else. In criminal culture, informing is the ultimate betrayal. Frank became known as a rat, an informant. After release, he found himself isolated. Harlem wasn't welcoming. Former associates wouldn't speak to him. He worked service jobs, manual labor, minimal wages. The $52 million was gone, seized, spent on legal defense, lost. In 2007, his life story became American Gangster. Generated some income, renewed public interest, also reinforced his reputation as someone who'd cooperated. Frank lived 38 more years after prison. Died May 30th, 2019, at age 88 in relative poverty, relative isolation. In later years, Frank reflected on what he'd learned and forgotten. Mr. Johnson taught me to avoid unnecessary violence. I didn't listen, created enemies who testified against me. He taught me to maintain good relationships. I didn't listen, alienated people who could have protected me. He taught me to stay quiet. I didn't listen, made myself a target through visibility. He taught me to think long-term. I didn't listen, built an empire that grew too fast and collapsed. If I'd followed his teachings more carefully, maybe I'd have been successful for decades like he was, instead of just a few years before losing everything. He trusted me with $10 million. I could have run, could have disappeared, could have become rich and started over somewhere else. I didn't because he trusted me and I wouldn't betray that trust. But later, I betrayed every lesson he taught, not by stealing his money, by forgetting his wisdom. That betrayal was worse than taking $10 million would have been, because he didn't just give me money, he gave me knowledge, and I wasted it. Bumpy Johnson trusted his driver with everything, with his life during the ambush, with $10 million on a drive to Philadelphia, with managing his entire organization during 11 years in prison. Frank Lucas earned that trust, proved himself loyal, brave, reliable, heroic. He saved Bumpy's life, saved a family from a fire, stopped a robbery, risked everything for people he cared about, used Bumpy's teachings to build a $100 million empire, then forgot the most important lessons and lost everything, not because the teachings were wrong, because he stopped following them. He got arrogant, thought he was smarter than his teacher, believed success meant he could ignore the rules that created that success. Violence instead of negotiation, visibility instead of discretion, short-term profits instead of long-term sustainability. And when everything collapsed, when he faced 70 years in prison, Frank violated the final rule, never cooperate, saved his freedom, destroyed his reputation forever. Bumpy Johnson died respected, dignity intact, having maintained power for decades. Frank Lucas died despised, having lost everything, having proven that great teaching only matters if you actually follow it. The driver Bumpy trusted with everything became a king, then became a lesson about what happens when you forget where you came from and who taught you how to survive. Frank was heroic, loyal, brave, until he wasn't, and that made all the difference.